Hey everyone, Bowling with the Fef on a Wednesday evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's the place where you share your unique bowling story live on our platform, and we have an absolutely unique one tonight, and I'm very excited to share it with you. This gentleman is a wealth of talent and knowledge, and not just on the lanes, but also behind the video camera, and we will get to that in just a moment. But those of you live, thank you so much for joining. The live chat is open. If you'd like to make comments, ask questions, feel free. If you're watching on replay, please make a comment and let me know what you think about the episode. It's been a blast interacting with a lot of you over the almost 2 years now that we've been doing this. And if you are either live or on replay, please remember to subscribe. I have been, we'll say, honored to have seen that there have been almost 700 folks subscribing to this channel, which is totally awesome. And hope that number keeps on going up. That's a big help to me, and it's a big help to others who want to see bowling content and live interviews. And that's a good way to do it, is to both like and subscribe this video and others on the channel. And I will do my best to get it distributed as widely as possible. So this is a pretty big week on the women's tour, the PWBA US Open, starting up tomorrow. The practice session just kind of wrapping up as we speak in New York. A grind, of course, as any US Open is. Here's a little look at the 2022 PWBA points leaders. This was, I guess, a chart that I hadn't known where to find until earlier this week. But they are up to date now, and you see that Shannon O'Keefe, the champion of the Twin Cities Open, is on top right now, north of 64,000 points. Clara Guerrero, number 2, Brianna Cote, who just had a terrific performance on television over this past weekend, and winning the BVL Classic at number 3. Number 4, Danielle McEwen, and number 5, Verity Crawley, who has made one stepladder this season so far, but has a bunch of 6th place finishes and is holding down the 5th spot with just a few events left to go in the season. It's gone by pretty quickly. You've got the Lucy Doubles and then the PWBA Classic Series in Texas in early August. So best of luck to the competitors who are taking part in the PWBA US Open this weekend. Of course, Father's Day is coming up pretty soon. And those of you who are still looking for a last-minute gift, remember, DLS, dads love salsa, and have I got a great salsa product to tell you about. Chip Magnet Salsa, based in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, distributing salsas, relishes, and more to stores in 38 states and Canada. If you don't have a place to find Chip Magnet near you, they are ready and willing to take your order at chipmagnetsalsa.com. Be a part of the salsa takeover, and treat your dad to some Chip Magnet salsa. Chip Magnet, raise your snack standards. Well, I've rambled on enough. Let's bring on our guest. He is a documentary filmmaker from Columbus, Ohio. His name is Nathan Agin. Nathan Agin. I hope I pronounced that right. I've been kind of going back and forth between Agin and Agin. But Nathan is from Columbus, Ohio. He is a bowler. He's a documentary filmmaker and has one heck of a project that he's working on right now. Nathan, how you doing tonight?
Doing great. How about yourself, Andrew?
Doing great. Thank you so much for coming on. We need to know, because a lot of us aren't familiar with this project just yet, but it's called As the Pins Fall. tell us just kind of in a Cliff's Notes version, what do we need to know about what this is all about?
Yeah, so this is basically a documentary series. There have been many documentaries on bowling in the past. One that I think about a lot is the Gentlemen's League documentary, Ordinary Gentlemen's, sorry.
Yep, from Bull
And
Bowling. Mhm.
yeah, and it's a great documentary, from the early 2000s. If you haven't seen it, I'd highly recommend it. And it was very inspiring. But I noticed when I watched it that it's a little old. It's from the early 2000s, and a lot has changed since then. I mean, literally a whole new bowling style has kind of emerged on the scene since then. That kind of shows how outdated it is. So my inspiration from watching that was how can we kind of take that and then just make it bigger and cover more, modern stories. So for us, we're kind of taking a very ambitious task here where we're not just trying to cover just the PBA and all that, but we want to cover different areas of the bowling world, not just bowling in general. So things like owning a pro shop, owning a bowling alley, the struggles of that, right? That's just rarely ever talked about. And it's actually not as profitable as people might think, right? And it really shows how much passion goes into bowling from these owners. Because if they really wanted to make money, they do something else, right?
Sure.
So we have a bunch of those guys in there, talking about things like the PWBA and all that stuff, and college bowling, high school bowling, trying to cover as much as possible without it being too crazy. But yeah, just trying to cover a lot as we can. So
No, very very interesting subject matter, and I'm not just saying that because I run a YouTube channel on bowling. And you're right. It's things of this nature, and it sounds like this magnitude just aren't out there, and there is definitely an appetite for it. So you know, we've talked with Ben Glascock on from 10 Pin Life. He was our guest on episode 63. He was the one who challenged you to be on the show. Here's what he had to say back then when he was doing
He was gracious enough to send me a 1.5 minute long, like teaser trailer type thing. And that documentary is going to change the game. It's literally, I told him, I was like, this is the best thing anybody has made in bowling in years.
Wow.
Like, it's legit. He's doing something that bowling really, really needs. And the cool part about it is he's really good at it. Like, he's good at filmmaking. And I am super excited to see what he can do with that.
So high praise to be sure. And it seems like his, I guess, standing in this whole thing is no longer just from the outside looking in. You guys have kind of partnered up on this project, which is really neat because he's grown a huge following with 10 Pin Life. But
yeah.
tell me about how how he plays into this project and how that partnership came to be.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I interviewed Ben pretty early on, like he talked about. When I found him, I think he was kind of just starting out. I think it was like maybe a few hundred subscribers, but I saw a lot of potential in what he was doing, and clearly he just knew what he was doing from a marketing perspective, right? That's one thing that I'm sure you see a lot. This is a very well designed show, and the branding is on point. But I think for a lot of bowlers, that's not so much the priority right now, right? Just because the standard's kind of low. You see Jason Belmonte, who's trying to elevate it, but everyone else is kind of lagging behind. So when I saw his channel, I was like, man, this guy knows what he's doing. And after I interviewed him, we talked just normally as well about everything else, and sure enough, he actually does do marketing as a career. So we just talked. Bowlers can just talk forever about bowling, so we're just talking, and we kind of found that our views on this stuff kind of aligned very well. And when I told him more about the project, he just got more and more excited. As you can tell by that, he's being very gracious in that. And over time, I just realized as he was growing his YouTube channel, I realized it was a really good opportunity here to not only bring him on to help spread the word, but also, I mean, just having someone that knows as much bowling as he does. I'm a bowler. I think I'm kind of like the average bowler, average 200 on house, nothing crazy. But Benny, he's actually a really good bowler, and he knows his stuff, and so that knowledge is just priceless, especially when if I come to him about something, I can say, hey, like, what do you think of this? So he's technically in the producer role, but in a weird way, it is almost kind of like co-directing where I really value his opinion, creatively, and also from a a producer point of view. So
Yeah. He told me, he said that he gave you some recommendations for some people who would be kind of cool to have on. And then you guys sort of parted ways. But like you said, when his channel took off, 10 Pin Life, you reached out to see if he would, be interested in being the interviewer and partner with you. And he said he couldn't say no once he saw the trailer. And that's a great point too, is that the timing of this particular interview is special because your trailer is going to be published soon.
yeah. So yeah, we're about to launch the teaser trailer. Eventually down the line, I think there will be a much bigger and better trailer. But I think this is kind of just to show what's kind of coming. And how I kind of expect it to happen is that once this comes out, I think a lot more people want to kind of join and be on board with it. So obviously, I think the scope is going to explode once this comes out. But yeah, I'm excited. I mean, he again, Ben is really gracious with his comments, but I really do hope that people kind of feel that connection. And I think people do when you make something, when you're part of the community, what they want to see because you're one of them, right? So especially when I hear Ben talk about this, who's so in bowling, when he says comments like that, it gives me a lot of hope that we're making something good. So
Yeah. You mentioned, kind of the producer and director titles that you guys both have. He told me that his role is more in the people, leveraging his next work, to get the right people coordinating to make those interviews happen and conducting them. If you've seen his channel lately, it's plain to see with interviews, the likes of Chad Murphy, Jason Belmonte, the biggest people in the sport, where he says you're the director. So you're where you both look for vision on the project. Is there any way to explain what your vision is in this?
Yeah. First, I want to say the production quality on this stream, man, is so crazy. Like, I can't believe this for especially a bowling podcast. It's insane.
Don't speak so soon. I'm crossing my fingers to
Yeah.
make sure
No, I
some
mean,
cord doesn't pop out or something.
yeah, this is impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the vision, it's a little tricky right now because it's just ever growing, So I'm pretty hesitant to say certain things because I don't want to say something and then it changes and all that. But ultimately, how I see it is as a documentary series, there's going to be episodes, and it's going to feature different individual stories within those episodes on particular topics. So when you see Jillian Martin, for example, obviously it's going to cover a lot of youth bowling, especially the collegiate level, and hopefully we get to follow her into her next steps in college bowling, and obviously just talk about her story. And then we have people like Wayne Webb who talk about not only their career but also owning a very successful bowling alley. I mean, in my opinion, I think has one of the best in Ohio, if not the best. And just stuff like that, kind of going per episode, kind of per topic. That way it doesn't get too overloaded, right? I originally wanted this to be, a straight feature-length documentary, like an hour and a half. But I realized that it would just probably be too much. It would be like Star Wars Episode 9, where they're just stuffing everything into one thing when it really should be a series. So
It's funny you bring that up because Ben and I were actually talking about Star Wars at the Twin Cities Open, and I admitted to him that I've never seen a single Star Wars all the way through.
Wow.
So, it just kind of happened that way, and he's a big Star Wars guy.
I mean, I get it. I mean, I tried to watch, Lord of the Rings one time, and I fell asleep so bad. I almost never fall asleep watching movies, and my friend was with me, and he loves Lord of the Rings. Like, he watched the extended cut every year on its anniversary, whatever. I felt so bad about that, but so I get it, man. I mean, it's not for everyone.
Yeah, I've never seen that movie either. I swear I've seen movies, but
just
anyway.
bowling movies.
Yeah, bowling movies. Like,
as long as you watch ours, that's fine.
Dreamer, of course.
Yeah.
So let's kind of get into your bowling story. You mentioned that you are a bowler, which kind of puts you in a unique role as a creator who is also kind of entrenched in the sport a bit. Tell us how you got started in bowling itself.
Yeah, I mean, I started bowling when I was about 6 years old. My mom was kind of a bowler. She bowled before I was born, but it wasn't anything like crazy. I mean, I don't think she averaged more than 150. I'm not 100% sure, but so I started bowling when I was 6 years old in New Jersey at a place called Laura Lanes. And yeah, it was just fun, man. I mean, when I was a kid, I kind of felt like there wasn't a whole lot of things that I was necessarily like really good at. And so bowling was one of the few things that caught my eye in terms of like I could see progress pretty fast, you know. Um, I was never like a bowling prodigy or anything, but it was just a fun time. And I would bowl with my one friend David, you know, just on the weekends in the league, you know. So it was just a cool way to just I don't know, just meet people, you know, kids my age and just have fun. Um, Over time, I went on to just bowl, you know, like more leagues, did youth tournaments, you know, Pepsi tournaments, of course, all that good stuff. And then bowled a little bit in high school. I bowled, I think, junior, senior year. So, and I would have done it earlier. I actually didn't even know they had a bowling program, which is one thing, you know, one reason I want to talk about this in the documentary is because I don't even think parents know the opportunity out there, especially for scholarships, right?
Oh yeah.
You know, I've talked with USBC about this where it's kind of obvious that the path to growing bowling is in the youth. And I think if parents knew, you know, not that there's really talented bowlers in college, but the bar for getting into a scholarship level isn't crazy compared to other sports, right?
Hmm.
Like obviously basketball, it takes so much to get a full ride. So, you know, covering stuff like that. But
Yeah.
anyway, going back, yeah, so I bowled in high school. Nothing insane. I think I averaged like 180 or whatever. It wasn't crazy. And then I kind of stopped bowling for a while. I kind of, you know, once I moved, I was in college. I was moving around. Didn't really think about it too much. But you know, I started documentary filmmaking at some point, which we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And it just came this moment last year where, you know, during COVID, like after COVID, I think people were getting more into nostalgic activities, and obviously we saw a rise in bowling a little bit. I think we saw a rise in any interest really, and I just kind of got back into it and fell in love again. You know, currently bowling better than I ever have been bowling, so I've actually gotten better just from making this documentary. So that's my hope, right? Is that I'm learning stuff as I'm going, and you know, I think being a quote unquote average bowler, it puts me in a unique position where I can kind of see if something impacts me as a bowler, average bowler, I can tell that for most people that will be impactful for them to see. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, so nothing insanely crazy, no Jillian Martin story or anything, but you know, it's just fun. So,
There aren't many of us that have a Jillian Martin story,
yeah, I wish.
but it's cool that you kind of came up through what is really a big bowling area in New Jersey. We've had some folks on the show from New Jersey and kind of getting their start and growing in the sport
For
there.
sure.
You mentioned kind of falling out of it and then falling back in love, as you said, with it in COVID times. What was that like? What's that feeling like to get back in and realize that this is not just something you're going to do temporarily, that this is something you really have a passion
Yeah.
for?
Well, even when I wasn't really doing bowling, I thought about making bowling documentaries. I actually had this funny story where I did actually, I think I was 19 or 18 years old, where this is like super early on making documentaries. I mean, I was terrible at it. And I actually sent Jason Belmonte an email being like, I would love to tell your story. Let's make a documentary. But of course, like, he's not going to do that, right?
Never know till you ask, right?
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought about it sometimes, but yeah, I mean, just getting back into it, I mean, it's been really cool. It showed me, well, one thing I thought was like, I wish I didn't quit, honestly, because I could have been a lot better by now. But I don't know, I have a new level of appreciation for it.
Mhm.
I think when I quit, it was, you know, I got so stuck in the local mindset 'cause with my friends and people I knew locally, I was pretty good for my age. And then I think once I started uh, bowling in high school and everything, I started seeing, oh, I'm actually not really that good as I thought. And I think just a combination of that and I was really stubborn when I was younger, and I don't think I understood how to learn how to get better at something, you know.
Mhm.
But in a weird way, actually in a very full circle way, learning filmmaking actually taught me the skills of how to get better at bowling in a weird way, you know.
Hmm.
It taught me how to prioritize. One example is like actually practicing instead of just bowling, right? You're not gonna get better just bowling in your league. You gotta actually practice and work on things. And that's what I saw through filmmaking. And you know, so hopefully
Yeah.
that answers your question. I kind of
No,
forgot what it was, but
totally. No, I was talking about what it felt like to fall back in love with it, but I think
oh
that
yeah,
illustrates really well
yeah,
is that, not only is it new and exciting, but you even what I want to say is you grew in it without doing it. You understood more getting back into it than you did
For
as a young
sure.
player. And
Yeah.
that maturity is something that is kind of invaluable. I mean, a lot of people need that.
Yeah. That's what's cool about bowling or just like doing anything in general where it's obviously getting better at bowling requires very specific things and specific drills. Like if I'm practicing bowling, I'm not necessarily getting better at shooting cameras, whatever. But there is this underlying principle where when you learn the principles of learning from one thing, it always applies over to something else. Um, and so it's pretty beautiful when you look at it from that perspective because I realize actually when I am learning how to get better at bowling, I am learning how to get better at filmmaking, essentially.
Sure.
And the proof is that when I came back, I was actually better already than when I was younger, even though I'd never bowled during that time. So,
Yeah.
it's like I don't know if you've ever had this moment where you're playing a video game and you get stuck on a level for so long and you just put it off. You're like you rage quit. You come back later and you can just do it somehow or get
Yep.
a lot closer. So it's
Sure.
also about that ego, right? When you're a lot of people when they quit because they're so into the idea of the result of doing good. But you know that feeling when you take a break and you come back and it's just so magical again because there's no expectations, there's no do or die mentality, weird stuff. So just
Yeah.
actually just enjoying each shot, you know.
No, I'm sure my 9-year-old would love for me to come back to those video games a little more often than I do,
Yeah.
but I know the feeling. It's
Yeah.
it's happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened to a lot of people. What you mentioned college bowling. Was college bowling ever on your radar?
No, not really. I honestly really did not know that stuff was that possible. It does shock me how much information I didn't know about with bowling. And again, part of that's my fault, like not really looking too deep into it. I watched ESPN PBA bowling, and that was about it. Like I didn't know anything else. There wasn't a Brad and Kyle, there wasn't a Darren Tang. I just didn't know. I didn't go on the forums, because this is I'm like 18, 17, and this is when Instagram's popping off, Snapchat's popping off. I'm not going to go on some bowling forum.
Right.
So it was a weird time for my generation. So, um, yeah, so I really didn't know much about it, honestly. And through doing this documentary, I've been amazed to see not only how sophisticated it is, but how hard it is. I had
Sure.
no idea that they were bowling on really complicated oil patterns. And yeah, it's really respectable. So.
Sure. How often are you bowling these days?
Yeah, so right now I try to practice like twice a week. Just wrapped up a fall league at Wayne Webb's. Um, I forgot how long those go on for. I forgot it's like a fall and winter league actually.
Yeah.
So sort of kind of not in a league right now. I'm just
Mhm.
practicing. I felt like I wasn't practicing enough. I was probably just bowling too much, which again, the experience is important. But these days, I'm like bowling and different sweepers, trying to bowl on more challenging oil patterns that I've never really bowled on. So, and that's just opened my eyes through this documentary as well. Like just seeing there's a whole new level of bowling. Like house bowling is just the surface level. Once you get into the crazy oil patterns, it's a totally different game.
Yeah.
It's fun, man. It's great. So.
It is. Yeah, for sure. When is it that you decided to pick up a camera or phone or whatever you did at the start and start filmmaking? I mean, people like me and, probably me more than Ben, we tote around a little camcorder and, try and, make this YouTube channel, kind of sing a little bit. But
Yeah.
making a documentary seems like a bigger, more robust project than just
Yeah.
videos for a YouTube channel.
So after I answer this, I definitely want to hear your story about your YouTube channel and everything. 'Cause I'm very curious about this.
Sure.
This is clearly not your first rodeo. Um, so yeah, I mean, for me, like my filmmaking story is very interesting, and it definitely didn't have like a path in a sense. So I'm 23 years old. I grew up in a really fortunate time of video equipment being incredibly accessible and having free editing software, Windows Movie Maker. So before that moment, I mean, that was so rare. 10 years prior, you had to pay a serious premium to have access to this. So I grew up, I bought this like $35 camera from a dollar store one time. So I like saved up money by selling random things to kids in my area. Um, Bought that, just made stupid videos with my friends, just like any kid does these days, I guess. And then eventually I got kind of into, I was really early on YouTube, especially I think for kids my age. 2007, 2008, just really got obsessed with the YouTube world. I mean, I've tried almost every kind of type of content when I was younger. And I think what really kind of jump started it was doing video editing for, this is gonna sound super nerdy, but video game montages, started with making really dumb Toontown videos. I don't know if you've ever heard that game before.
That one I haven't, but I know there's a lot of that, still going on
Oh
now,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and it's a hugely popular thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then so like the main thing was I made Call of Duty edits, and that was like, honestly, some magical times. I look back at that now, I'm like, man, I still think that was even more fun than what I do now in a weird way, Wish I could go back to that. But it was just this interesting community where people are playing Call of Duty, recording themselves doing crazy trick shot, like stunt moves, whatever, and then the player would then send it off to you, and then you would edit it to cool music, and it was just cool because there was just no rules. It was like, do whatever you want with this, and this skill of like synchronizing everything to music in a really creative way. It was invaluable. And what's funny is that now we've actually seen that go on to a lot of travel videos now. Like I'm sure you've seen the explosion of travel videos back in like 2015, 16, 17.
Oh, yeah.
Sam Colder just killing it on YouTube. That was stolen from the Call of Duty community, honestly, in my opinion. That's just my thoughts.
Sure.
I really should make a documentary about that one day.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, I did that for a long time in high school. I had no expectations. I really thought I was just gonna go to college for a business degree or whatever. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And one day I kind of just realized that, well, so actually what I started doing was I bought a camera again, a little bit better because I went to edit stuff and I just kind of ran out of stuff to edit. So I really bought a camera just to edit more things. There's no intentions of filmmaking really. But something clicked eventually where I realized I was like, man, I really like doing this stuff. And I think that I could make it maybe as a video editor. That was always my main goal. And then, the filmmaking, like the recording side and the editing side kind of went hand in hand over time and grew. And yeah, I mean, eventually just got to the point where I'm doing freelancing, all these different stuff. And I ended up moving to Florida for film school. And that's actually where the documentary stuff came in, where by this point I had a YouTube channel. I had like 10,000 subscribers, all that, making random travel videos or I don't know, these weird, fake deep videos and all that teenager angst stuff. And I mean, I thought I was just going to go to narrative filmmaking. I wasn't really sure what to do. And there was this competition actually in my school where they would basically set you up for, it's like a documentary film festival, but they would actually set you up with the subjects. So basically who you would interview. And this was always the biggest obstacle for me. I wanted to make a documentary before, but I was like, who do I interview? How do I convince them with no documentary, So yeah, they hooked me up with this one lady who was incredibly, had a great career. It was basically, she was an immigrant from communist Romania, came here, made an amazing life, PhDs, wrote books, all this stuff. So yeah, I went from there. I mean, I just made that. I had no idea how a documentary was made. It honestly looked like a Call of Duty video in a weird way. If you actually look at the format, it's really strange. But I actually ended up winning as a student, so the student category, and it just, man, I just took off with that. I felt so in love with the idea of documentary filmmaking because it was so reliant on the editing side, which is where I thrived. Narrative filmmaking is very much in the pre-production, the writing, and the production side. But, not saying that post-production isn't impactful, it is, but you don't really make decisions that much. And with documentary filmmaking, in my opinion, it's almost all in the edit at some level, because I can make this documentary and it's changing all the time, It might change just having this conversation with you. I might have a new idea and then we go off and do that, So it was just a powerful thing. And, eventually went on to, I tried my hand at an Amazon Prime documentary thankfully it worked. I was 19, 20-ish when I did that, and which we can talk about at some point here later. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was a very wild trajectory. None of it was planned. And still to this day, I mean, it's just like I didn't plan before this documentary. I was like, I didn't know I was going to do a bowling documentary, so
Yeah.
here we are. So
Was it tough for you to go from, I'll use the cliche term, YouTuber to documentary filmmaker? I mean, you talked about film school. Was that a tough process where, you almost had to learn a new way of doing this, or
oh
did a
yeah.
lot of your skill kind of translate?
Well, so I think the skill translated a lot in documentaries, which is why on the editing side, just editing. Um, but I really had no idea how to tell a story, and that was very apparent. And going back to the ego thing, like we talked about before, where the same problem I had with bowling was I felt, decently talented for my age in bowling, and then got to a point where I hit a ceiling and couldn't get any better because of my ego. I wanted to be good, but when you want to be good all the time, you can't, you know, practice and look like a dumbass when you're practicing, right? When you're doing your drill releases or whatever,
Yeah.
or release drills, it's like I couldn't do that. So the same thing happened with that, right? It was a great question because I got to a point where I realized, oh, I don't know how to tell a story. And I had to be very honest with myself and realize, I felt like hot shit when I was rolling in there the first time. I thought I have so much experience compared to these, my classmates. I'm gonna be star of the class, blah blah. And don't get me wrong, these people were also new and like trying to learn. But I realized, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing in terms of storytelling. I don't know how to actually, besides making something that looks cool, how do I actually impact an audience, how to make them feel something, how to convey something. And it was tough, man. It was very, very tough. But I think that first documentary kind of gave me a glimpse into how I could do that. So from there, I didn't know anything about story structures, but it kind of lit a fire under me to start studying.
Sure.
So yeah.
Like you mentioned, you start doing these, you get into this Amazon Prime thing. You had two of them that were pretty big as far as independent documentaries were concerned, one about video games, the other about food trucks. What was that like to see, to go from, again, seeing your work, you know kind of one person to all of a sudden, oh my gosh, people want to consume this content and they want to do it on a platform that's well known like Prime.
Yeah. It was a weird feeling. I remember telling my one friend that I was like, it would be a cool feeling to see a review on something that it wasn't your friend or family. Like it was someone that no bias, just like legitimately giving their opinion, even if it was a 1 star. I'm like, God, that'd be so cool.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully not a 1 star, but
Right.
um, and yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting feeling. For me, it was, how do I go from these little mini documentaries on YouTube and how do I kind of take that to the next level? And I was very aware that, no one's going to give me a chance at this point. I was very aware of like, okay, I have to really prove myself because for me, I'm not the most networking social guy. I'm introvert, super aware that's not my strong point. Someone like Ben, for example, I mean, anyone likes him when he talks, and so I don't really have that all the way. So I knew for me, I had to, prove myself through my skill. So I kind of just worked on making it. One big point that I made with the food truck one, which was the first Amazon Prime one, was kind of this experiment I was seeing. Okay, instead of trying to make these general audience videos like it was on YouTube, where the idea was to make it accessible to anyone, which is a mistake when you're starting out, right? And this is like you're making a podcast on bowling. It's like if you made a podcast like Joe Rogan's podcast, whatever, it's like it's so much competition and there's no how do you do the keywording and all this stuff, right? So
Yeah.
it's much easier to find you when it's about bowling. And I had this realization as well. So for me, it was a experimentation on how do I target a very niche audience and just focus on that, start very small, then eventually it'll grow in itself. So, I mean, I started as humble as, I went to Reddit on a food truck subreddit and literally asked these people, like, what do you guys want to see in this documentary, right? So I'm saying like, oh, it's gonna be on Amazon Prime. I had no idea it was gonna be on Amazon Prime. I was just betting that it could, hopefully work. And they gave great ideas. And one thing they said a lot that shocked me was, we're tired of seeing it being romanticized on TV. Like people, it shows them buying a food truck, they line it outside, and all of a sudden everyone buys it and they make a bunch of money. It's like it obviously doesn't work like that.
Mhm.
So they just want to see the reality, and no one had done it before. So I kind of took the opportunity. I was like, okay, let's do this. I knew nothing about food trucks, right? Totally different situation in this documentary. I knew absolutely nothing. But when you're talking with the community and you're paying attention, you can figure out what's important to them. And so, yeah, it was just a really interesting experiment to kind of be like, that's pretty
He knows
funny.
a lot of people that would disagree with you.
Yeah. I haven't seen evidence of that. But yeah, I mean, it was just really interesting because it showed the power of that in a way that, as an independent filmmaker, it not only gave me a chance to stand out, but also, like you said, real people were watching it, real food truck people, and thankfully got to a point where, because it started out small, started the subreddit, and then it built over time, and now it still does really well actually, and now people who aren't even in the food truck niche watch it because everyone likes watching food stuff.
Oh yeah.
So that was the exact same approach I took with the Wizard 101 documentary, and now I hope to do with this one. Um, just so much emphasis on the community, so much emphasis on what the bowlers want to see. And of course, we're trying to, grow the sport as much as we can. So, but it has to start with the bowlers.
Yeah.
Too many times you see, I know you don't like Star Wars, but too many
It's all right.
times you see with dedicated fan bases where they try to cater to the outside when clearly the answer is to cater to the inside out.
Sure.
It's amazing how many times people take existing IPOs and just murder it. They just ruin it because they're trying to make something for the general audience. And, not only does the general audience not like it anyway, but now the core fan base doesn't even like it. So everyone loses.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
And even this show is kind of it's a test of, okay, can I do something that appeals to the hardcore serious bowler, and can I also do something that appeals to the casual bowler through the telling of stories that we can all appreciate, right?
exactly.
Yeah.
And you have to talk like that too, because it's like, it's like raising a kid. It's like,
Mhm.
how are you going to, create a grown up if you talk to it like a baby for the rest of its life? So I really, that's what I like about what you do. And especially what Brad and Kyle and all of them do, like, because I learned a lot from watching them, because obviously they have some beginner videos, like in the same way you'll try to say certain topics that are for beginners, but
Mhm.
ultimately they're not as afraid to get really into the nitty gritty, and sometimes can make it over complicated. But it's that knowledge that you kind of need to know, to understand it. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, I agree. I think it's great.
Yeah, and with with Ben as a part of this, Ben, the one thing that I think he is really good at is taking those complex topics and drilling down, making them digestible for not only the hardcore bowler, but people
Yeah,
who are a little more casual with it. So I think he'll serve you well in that
yeah,
regard too. So in order to do something like this, whether it be a YouTube channel or a documentary, you got to have gear, right? You mentioned the meager $35 camera when you were starting out. I mean, I understand that too, because I've had to go through an evolution of gear myself, and that evolution is probably going to continue as long as I keep
for
doing
sure.
this. But how has that journey, that part of the journey anyway, been for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me, um, I have, very supporting parents, but they're also not loaded.
Yeah.
And for me, my parents helped me out a decent amount when I was younger. But gear was a struggle point for me. Not, like I mentioned before, not having the access that some of my friends might have had, and through networking, all these different things. And when you're on a film student's shoot, of course, you have so much access. But for me, I mean, a lot of these documentaries were really shot with one camera. I had a Sony A7 III, which is a pretty good camera. Like, I'm not gonna, I love that camera, but there's a big difference between that versus crazy cinema cameras, and having all this gear. And for a lot of these documentaries, I've never had a crew or anything really. So with the food truck documentary, I did have a little bit of help with that, which was amazing. But for the main part, most of it was just a Sony A7 III, a crappy Rode mic on top of it, like the $100 one from Best Buy. No stabilizer, no grip, like just handheld camera. And thankfully, because I knew how to edit, I could, I knew how to abuse warp stabilizer like crazy. I don't know if you've used that before.
I've heard it on Adobe Premiere, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And thankfully, I just know how to like shoot in a way that works for it somehow. But besides that, it was super limited. And I should send this to you. There's a really good video clip of when we're making the food truck documentary. I was at my parents' house when I was finishing it up, and we were actually recording a lot of the sound effects ourselves, because one thing that happened was in the food trucks, obviously it's super loud. If anyone's been to a food truck, the generator is insanely loud. So there's like shots in the inside they're cooking. This guy's like, I don't know, bulk cooking like potatoes or something. And so we actually went and took my blue snowball mic, some USB mic, and literally just recorded us cooking potatoes on the stovetop like they were doing. So it's really interesting how like eventually the skill level can help, cover up some of the budget wise, and you can make anything hopefully sound pretty good, right? So going back to the gear, like that's the beautiful part about the evolution, is that if you start out with a really good camera, you would have no idea how to actually do much. The reason why you have a good shot here is because you had a crappy camera before that probably sucked, and the low lighting probably sucked, and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you realize just how dark our world is,
yeah,
when
yeah,
you shoot video. It just
yeah.
is.
So our
Yeah,
eyes adjust pretty easily, but yeah, cameras, it's a tough thing.
yeah,
So
for
yeah.
sure. So you end up into this bowling thing. Did you always have the goal, the plan, etc., that hey, I'm a bowler, it's part of my history, I'm going to do this eventually, or did you either have to convince yourself or be convinced that this was going to be a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, these documentaries aren't something I just jump into, obviously. I spent a lot of time. Well, first I started coming back to bowling, like I talked about after
Yeah.
COVID, and I was just bowling just to do it. And then there was, something I started kind of researching, and of course I'm watching Brad and Kyle, and I was amazed by that because when I was bowling, I never saw people like Brad and Kyle, and it was really cool to see um, bowling vloggers that actually were, actually had a community and were doing really well, and showed a new path in bowling. Like obviously we hear all the time how if you don't win, you just can't make money and you can't make it. But not saying they don't win, and not that they're very good, but they also created another level. And this is what me and Ben had talked about all the time, where actually I remember him saying before this even happened, if Brad or Kyle made a show, that was going to be a crazy show. And he was right. That show that Kyle made and won, it was big, and the applause was crazy. Someone that was telling me recently that they were there, and he was like, they cheered almost as loud as for Jason Belmonte, and that's a pretty big thing.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so obviously it's kind of calculated to some level, where as a bowler, I saw, okay, there's a huge gap here. In my opinion, yes, there's flow bowling documentaries. I don't think they're super great. I think they're okay, but the League of Ordinary Gentlemen was probably the last really good one, and it's been 20 years. So I realized it's time for someone to kind of fill that gap, update it. And obviously there's an incredible community, and I think we don't even see most of it. One evidence I've seen of this is that like Brad and Kyle, they have 100,000 subscribers, which is great, and obviously they're the most subscribed, I think, bowling vloggers, if I think so.
I
But
would guess so,
for
yeah.
sure. But when you go on Instagram, you see people's reels that can blow up to 1 million views easily, which is kind of shocking because you don't see numbers like that at all on Instagram or on YouTube. So you kind of realize there's a lot of bowling fans that are younger and aren't really watching Brad and Kyle, more casual fans, right?
Right.
So there's clearly a huge untapped market, and I know that it's something that bowling has struggled to tap into for a long time. So obviously they've gotten better over time, but it's I think there's a huge market there that's not being seen, and a huge fan base. So yeah, I mean, it's just a combination where I think it could be a very big turnout. I think it could be a beautiful thing because I love bowling. I think it's fascinating. And what's really fascinating about it is that people don't even understand how deep it goes. It's
Yeah.
those sports you like when you see Kobe play basketball, if you don't play basketball, you understand how ridiculous that is. Or watching Tiger Woods, you get it, but when you watch Jason Belmonte, not everyone gets it. Most
Yeah.
people don't. And I find myself to this day starting to understand it after all this time.
When you started this process, A, when was that? And B, did you have an initial plan to just do one big documentary instead of segmenting it
Mm.
in a series?
So it originally started out where um, I was going to do, well, first I was going to do just something for Wayne Webb because it was coming out of COVID. I honestly just wanted to practice filmmaking at this point. I was working a job and I was learning so much at this job, but I wanted to just make something to keep it, just keep learning. And so I started with Wayne Webb. I did the first interview that's in that trailer that you see, and then eventually I was like, man, maybe I should maybe make a series of different PBA players, and it just kept growing. I mean, over time I started realizing the potential here, and just talking to bowlers in general, seeing what they think, and eventually I realized there's a huge gap here that I thought could be filled. Um, and obviously, as we keep going, I think it's going to just keep growing in terms of the scope. Obviously, at some point, it has to okay, that's enough. Like we can't go any further than this, right? Can't go too ahead of ourselves. But I think it's going to keep evolving over time, and some things may fall to the side, some things will replace it. But ultimately, it was not planned to be this big, and that's why we're making the crowdfund campaign, because we in order to get to that level. I mean, the biggest expense on our end is kind of traveling to these people, right? Like I would love to interview a lot of these people like Darren Tang, Brad and Kyle, anyone that's been a big part of bowling. Um, but it costs a lot of money to get there. And like I mentioned, I personally don't have a lot of crazy gear for myself. So we're just it's a big passion project essentially.
Mhm.
And I think that's where Ben and I relate so well, because we know how to make a lot with little, and really let the passion shine through.
Yeah.
So my whole pitch is that if you guys see the trailer and you really like it, just imagine if we could actually get funding to really do it properly. I mean,
Yeah.
most of that was really recorded off of one little camera.
Mhm.
So if we could really push that, I think we can make something that would, one, tell the story properly, but do it on a highest level that we can, and hopefully get it distributed to a major platform to really spread the word.
Yeah.
And I think the argument's strong to do it.
Sure. I want, you mentioned the interviewing, in that part about the travel, which, I can appreciate having done a little of that myself, not to the level that you or Ben have. But, when Ben came on, he did mention that Andrew Anderson was a part of this. So I had to reach out and ask about you as, the interviewer. And, he told me that you were very excited and enthusiastic about learning not only about his bowling, but about the history of bowling. He said he loved working with you and hopes to see your work continue to thrive. I mean, that's got to feel really good. But what about that? I mean, where does that come from? That need to know not only about the subject you're talking to, but kind of a bigger picture for all this.
Yeah. Because like I said before, this research is so crazy, man. Like I don't, I did not expect you to pull up the quotes like that. Sorry, can you repeat the question again on that?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I guess where does that come from? That that desire to not only know about kind of what's in front of you,
Oh,
meaning Andrew himself, but
okay.
also the history, the bigger picture.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, in order to go forward, we have to understand what happened before, and really, appreciate. I mean, because one, especially with bowling, it's a very interesting situation because it is peaked essentially. Not that it won't get back to that point, but from this moment, it has peaked from the early days, and it's very interesting because the culture was totally different in it. It's not that it just died out because people got bored. It's a combination of the culture changed, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that. But so I think for people like me, for example, I don't really know the history to it as much when I first started going into it, and I think it's fascinating to really not only to get appreciation for it, but to understand where this is all kind of heading, you know. And so, you know, and of course, I think to understand modern bowling, we have to understand where it kind of came from and see, you know, the struggles we have now. It's like, well, why is that happening? You know, and that's why I think the League of Ordinary Gentlemen was a great documentary because, you know, that takes place when the Microsoft executives ended up buying the PBA, and
Yeah, sure.
that was a really rough time, and we're basically rebuilding it. But in order to understand how insane that was, they had to show, you know, in the old days, and I can't really think of many of the sports that have had a scenario like this. You know, I mean, golf is one of those things that I feel like bowling could have been golf at some level, right? Not that it would be the same exact thing, but it had that same like high level, you know, like dress up in suits with cigars and bowl with the boys, you know, and
Mhm.
all that different stuff. And obviously, it's nice that it's evolving, but you know, it's like where does it go from here? And yeah, I just think that people like my age and um, really don't know about it. It seems to me, you know.
Sure.
Again, like I said, when I'm learning stuff when making it, I know that most people are going to learn stuff too, you know.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah. Let's look at, you know, kind of the bigger picture for this. You mentioned, hey, let's get this to a platform where a lot of people can see it. Is that the ultimate goal for this project, or is there more that you're hoping to achieve here?
that's a great question. I mean, again, it's so early on; it's hard to tell, and I don't want to say one thing and another thing happens. But I mean, ultimately, it would be great that if we could get it to a big platform like that, and also be able to spread the word. You know, it's something that I debated for a long time. Like, obviously, there's at some level you could put it on YouTube theoretically, but in my experience, I've noticed that putting it on YouTube has kind of a negative impact effect. I'm not talking about money, but I'm talking about in terms of how it's perceived. You know, I've had a documentary go on YouTube first, and it did not do well at all. It was just perceived poorly because it just has YouTube on it. Which, again, nothing wrong with YouTube, right? But it's just one of those things that there's a certain kind of it's just the algorithms, right? You just can't do well in it, um, but when I put on Amazon Prime, immediately it did so much better and it was perceived much better. So that's how I think about it for the story bowling. It's like if we're gonna try to make the best bowling documentary we can make thus far, it's like, well, we should try to get it the highest label as much as possible, you know, and don't want to cheapen it. Don't want We want people to think this is the real deal because I think it will be.
Yeah.
So
How about, is there a threshold that tells you whether this will be, I don't know what I'm getting my tenses, you know,
yeah,
kind of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
confused here, but once it's done, is there a
Mhm.
threshold that will tell you if this is successful or not?
Man, that's a good question. I mean, obviously it's gonna be very different. I think for me, the main success with this one, you know, because it's different for every documentary. You know, I've made the one on the food truck documentary. It's like not spreading the word much on that. Besides, I think the biggest part for that was showing other people, hey, we didn't realize it took this much work, right? And that was a
Yeah.
very overwhelming positive response from the food truck community and actually people who wanted to get into it because they're like, oh wow, I never realized it was this hard, but not in a negative way, right? It's very positive. Same thing with the Wizard 101 documentary. You know, that was a very different situation because that game clearly has peaked. We'll never return to that point, but it was more of a celebration. And you know, it's a very nostalgia trip. And I remember watching live streams of people reacting to it and seeing the chats. And when you see that mission being accomplished, where it's like, wow, people could bond over that and you know be reminded of the memories of how this game changed their life. And a lot of these people met their husbands and wives through this game, you know, their best friends and all that stuff. So with the bowling documentary, I think the big goal that Ben and I agree on, this is why we started working together, was we have to really start one spreading the word of the opportunity in bowling and what bowling actually really is. I think if people just knew of like even just the oil part, I think that would fascinate people, you know, and PBA is doing all they can to do that. But you know, you see videos like Vox, for example, has like what 20, 30 million views. That's talking about hidden oil patterns on the lane, you know. clearly there's a demand for that and people are interested. And if we can just push that conversation in the right direction. And, you know, I love Ben's interview with Jason Belmonte, where he starts talking about, you know, we need to push, you know, try to push his rock in the same direction. Everyone's trying to push it from different directions. And of course, you're going to have the old heads want it like the old ways. You got the new kids who want to do it some crazy new way, whatever. But we have to at least pick a direction and go in it. And I think the most positive one, like Andrew Anderson talked about, is like it has to start with the youth and upwards, you know.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate Andrew Anderson for saying that, first of all. But, you know, he told me right before I left that he was like, the biggest thing is going to be talk about the youth and the opportunity that's in there.
Sure.
So, and of course, we'll get some older people back as well. But yeah, so that's how I kind of see it. Yeah.
So eventually, we're going to have to know where we can find this trailer and where we can find and consume this documentary. So, in both of those elements, how do we do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the new teaser trailer will be on 10 Pin Life YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to that, go subscribe. Even besides this trailer, amazing content. If you're a bowler, you're gonna love it.
Totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I saw his video of the USB-C patterns, him bowling on that, I was like, man, that's exactly what we need right now for people to see how hard those patterns actually are. I just wish that he showed how good he was before he did that, because it's very misleading. But yeah, so it'll be on 10 Pin Life. Obviously, he'll promote it on Instagram, and I think he has Twitter. I have Instagram as well. It's at Agin Visuals. I'm sure there'll be a link somewhere. And we also have a crowdfund campaign, like I mentioned. This will go public on June 23rd, which is, I think, next Thursday.
Yeah.
And you know, if you want to support the story of bowling, I mean, this will be the best absolute way to do it. You know, the coolest thing about what I've learned over the years from having a low amount of equipment and making it work is that the budget we need to pull this off is not that high compared to most documentaries. You know, most documentaries, you're looking at millions of dollars to make it work. But I think from our experiences between me and Ben, we know how to make it work on a pretty low budget, and we could really do it properly. So yeah, you'll see the trailer on YouTube. Eventually, you know, you'll see updates through 10 Pin Life. I'm sure hopefully I can come back on this show eventually when it's ready and talk more about it. And yeah, then we'll see what it comes out on. But yeah, got a long way to go.
Awesome. Well, yeah, keep us posted, because I would love to not only see it, but also, you know, help you guys share it and all that good stuff. So now we kind of come to the part of the show that I call off the sheet, and that you were familiar with before, where I ask you to challenge somebody else to be on the show. Not necessarily the greatest bowler in the world, but someone who has a passion for the sport and a unique story to tell. So, Nathan Agin, who would you like to challenge to be a future guest on Bowling with the Fef?
Yeah, so I actually was going to say Andrew Anderson. So that's like kind of interesting. I don't know if that option's still available. It seems like you're connected with him. So,
you know, I interviewed him for about 10 minutes at the World Series of Bowling, but he hasn't come on and told his whole story. So I'll give you credit there. He'd be a great one. Yeah.
I think he's great. I mean, from what, I'm not going to spoil it, but from what I've heard, I mean, that dude is dedicated. And I mean, one thing I'll just say that I thought was so interesting from his interview, where he talked about, you know, he didn't grow up with a whole lot of money. And so his Christmas gifts for the year usually were, he was asking to be able to enter into these certain tournaments. And I mean, that's just amazing. You know, I mean, as a young kid, I mean, obviously you want the Xbox, you want the new PlayStation or whatever. But the fact that all he really wanted to do was enter tournaments at such a young age, I mean, man, he was born to be a winner. Yeah. So yeah, between that, I mean, also I think Rick Harding is a great choice. He's a owner, I think, of it's pronounced Plumore Lanes. It's like Coldwater Lanes, basically.
Okay.
He has a great story as well. So one of those two would be great.
Great. Well, yeah, Andrew, Rick, if you're seeing this, if you're interested in taking Nathan up on his challenge, you can find me, DM me on Facebook. I'm Andrew Pfeffer, or you can email bowlingwiththefef@yahoo.com, and we will make that happen. Our next live stream coming up Monday, June 20th. We got the legend Larry Lickstein coming on. He is a PBA Hall of Famer, USBC Hall of Famer. Challenged by Tom Hankey Jr. back in episode 40. He's spent 22 years as PBA Director of Player Services, a legend in the sport. And you will hear his bowling story coming up Monday, June 20th, 6 p.m. Be sure and join us live for that. Nathan, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending the time with us, telling us your bowling and filmmaking story, and best of luck with the documentary. We can't wait to see it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I'll definitely keep you updated, obviously, and I would definitely love to show you, previews of it before it goes public. So
awesome.
Yeah.
I'm totally into that. So
perfect.
Great. We will definitely stay in touch. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great night. Be just and fear not. We will see you again on Monday.